6 hours later, Jake, Connor, and Marcus emerged from the service entrance looking completely different from the cocky pranksters who had entered. Their clothes were dirty, their faces were sweaty, and their hands showed the evidence of hard, manual labor. More importantly, their expressions had changed entirely. Gone was the arrogant confidence, replaced by something that looked very much like genuine humility. Supervisor Johnson followed them out, carrying a clipboard with what appeared to be evaluation notes. His stern expression had softened slightly, though he still looked skeptical about whether the 3 students had truly learned their lesson. "Well?" Hayes asked, having been relieved from his post and now approaching in a more relaxed posture. Though still maintaining his military bearing, Johnson consulted his notes. "They worked hard, I'll give them that. No complaints, no arguments, did everything asked of them. The tall one," he gestured toward Jake, "even volunteered for extra work when he finished early. They scrubbed toilets, mopped floors, cleaned windows, and helped move supplies without a single word of protest." Hayes nodded approvingly. "And the letters?" Connor stepped forward, holding 3 handwritten pages. "We wrote them during our lunch break. We looked up the families online first, read about their sons and daughters who died serving. It was..." His voice cracked slightly. "It was really hard to write knowing what we did today." Hayes took the letters and read through them carefully. The handwriting was genuine, not the hurried scrawl of someone trying to get through an assignment quickly. The words showed real thought, real understanding of what military service meant, and genuine appreciation for sacrifice. "These are good," Hayes said finally. "Honest. You can tell they came from people who were actually thinking about what they were writing." He looked up at the 3 friends. "What did you learn today?" Jake answered first. "That every job matters. The people who clean these toilets, who maintain these buildings, who stand guard, they're all doing important work that keeps everything running. We treated you like you were just there for our entertainment, but you're serving your country every single day," Marcus added. "We learned that respect isn't something you give because you have to. It's something you give because people earn it through their actions, their service, their dedication. You've earned more respect than we can ever give you." Connor held up his phone. "And I learned that not everything needs to be filmed and shared. Some things are private, some moments aren't meant to be entertainment for strangers online. What we did was wrong, and trying to make it go viral would have made it even worse." Hayes studied their faces carefully, using his military training to assess whether their words matched their genuine feelings. After a long moment, he seemed satisfied with what he saw. "There's one more thing you need to understand," Hayes said quietly. "Today could have gone very differently. Those charges I mentioned, they were real. Interfering with military personnel, disturbing the peace, attempted handling of a weapon. Those could have resulted in criminal records that would have followed you for life. No university would have kept you as students. Many employers would never have hired you. Your futures could have been destroyed by a few minutes of stupid behavior." The weight of this revelation settled over the 3 friends like a cold blanket. They had been so focused on their immediate fear and the hard work they had been assigned that they hadn't fully grasped how close they had come to permanently damaging their lives. "Why did you give us a chance?" Jake asked quietly. Hayes was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Because I've seen real evil in the world. I've fought against people who truly deserve no mercy, who would hurt innocent people without a second thought. You 3 weren't evil. You were just stupid and selfish. There's a difference, and that difference deserved a chance at redemption." He paused, then continued. "Also, because part of serving your country is believing that people can change, can learn, can become better than they were. If I didn't believe that, then what would I be fighting to protect?" Supervisor Johnson cleared his throat. "If you don't mind me saying so, Sergeant, these boys did good work today. Started off like typical spoiled university types, but by the end they were working like they actually cared about doing the job right." Hayes nodded. "That's what I wanted to hear." He turned back to the 3 students. "You're free to go. Your debt is paid, and this matter is closed. But remember, you represent your university, your families, and your country whenever you travel. Make sure you represent them well, As the three friends began to walk away, Connor turned back one last time. "Sergeant Hayes, thank you, not just for not pressing charges but for teaching us something important. We'll never forget this." Hayes watched them leave, noting how they walked differently now. Less swagger, more awareness of the world around them. They stopped to thank a custodian who was emptying trash bins, stepped aside respectfully for an elderly tourist, and generally moved through the world like people who had learned to see others as human beings deserving of consideration. Later, that evening, Hayes received word that all three students had made substantial donations to military charities and had volunteered to speak at their university about respecting veterans and service members. Jake had even changed his major to include courses on military history and public service. The incident became something of a legend among the palace guards, not because of the confrontation itself, but because of how it ended. It became a teaching moment about the difference between punishment and education, between breaking someone down and building them up to be better. Months later, Hayes received 3 letters in the mail. They were thank you notes from Jake, Connor, and Marcus, written on the anniversary of their incident. Jake had joined a veteran support organization at his university and was tutoring former soldiers who were pursuing education. Connor had deleted all his social media accounts focused on pranks and stunts, instead using his video skills to create documentaries about military service. Marcus had begun volunteering at a local veterans hospital, reading to patients and helping with recreational activities. Each letter expressed the same sentiment in different words, that one afternoon of consequences had changed the entire trajectory of their lives. They had learned that real strength came not from mocking others, but from serving others. They had discovered that true courage wasn't found in pushing boundaries for entertainment, but in dedicating yourself to something greater than your own, immediate gratification. Hayes kept those letters in his locker, a reminder that sometimes the best way to defend something you believe in is to help others understand why it's worth defending. The Queen's Guard, who had seemed like just a silent statue, had taught 3 young men about respect, service, and the real meaning of strength. The cocky pranksters who had thought they could push a royal guard around had learned the hard way, that some people should never be underestimated. But more importantly, they had learned that those same people, the ones who serve with discipline and dedication, are often the ones most willing to help others become better versions of themselves. Years later, when Hayes finally retired from active duty, he received an invitation to Jake's wedding. The young man who had once called him a dancing monkey was now a teacher, working with at-risk youth and helping them understand the value of respect and service. In his wedding speech, Jake mentioned a sergeant who had changed his life by showing him that true strength comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. Hayes attended the wedding in his dress uniform, proud to see what the 3 former troublemakers had become. They had pushed him too far that day outside Buckingham Palace, but instead of simply pushing back, he had pushed them toward becoming better men. It was, he reflected, perhaps the most important victory of his entire military career. Hayes stepped closer to the 3 students, his bearing still military straight but his expression showing something that might have been consideration rather than anger. The other guards waited silently, understanding that their sergeant was about to make a decision that would determine the trajectory of this entire incident. "Here's what's going to happen," Hayes said, his voice carrying the authority of command but lacking the earlier edge of fury. "You're going to learn what it means to serve something greater than yourselves. You're going to understand what respect actually looks like." Jake, Connor, and Marcus exchanged confused glances, unsure what Hayes meant but desperate to accept whatever alternative he was offering to criminal charges. Hayes continued, "You're going to spend the next 6 hours here, at the palace, but not as tourists. You're going to work. You're going to clean, you're going to assist with maintenance, and you're going to do whatever tasks the staff assigns you. During that time, you're going to learn about the history of this place, the people who serve here, and what it means to dedicate your life to something bigger than your own entertainment." The corporal nodded approvingly. "Community service with an educational component, I like it. But," Hayes added, his voice hardening again, "if you complain, if you show any attitude, if you demonstrate even the slightest disrespect to anyone, Here the offer is off the table and you'll be processed for formal charges, is that understood? Yes, sir. All three replied immediately, relief flooding their voices. Hayes wasn't finished. Furthermore, you're going to write letters. Personal letters to 3 military families who have lost loved ones in service to this country. You're going to research their stories, understand their sacrifice, and express genuine appreciation for what their family members gave up, so that you could have the freedom to act like fools outside this palace. Connor swallowed hard. The idea of writing to grieving families made the reality of their disrespect even more tangible and painful. Finally, Hayes said, looking directly at Connor, that video you recorded gets deleted, not just from your phone, but from any cloud storage, any social media accounts, anywhere it might have been uploaded. This incident doesn't become your moment of internet fame. Instead, it becomes a lesson in growing up. Connor nodded quickly and began deleting files from his phone under the watchful eyes of the guards. His dreams of viral videos and social media stardom evaporated as he realized how foolish and immature his behavior had been. The corporal stepped forward with a clipboard. Right then, you'll be assigned to Maintenance Supervisor Johnson. He's been working here for 15 years and has no patience for nonsense. You'll report to him for the next 6 hours and he'll make sure you understand what honest work looks like. Jake found his voice. Thank you, sir. Sergeant Hayes, sir. We don't deserve this chance, but we're grateful for it. Hayes studied Jake's face carefully. You're right. You don't deserve it. But everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, provided they're genuinely willing to learn. The question is whether you'll take this opportunity seriously or waste it. A stern-looking man in work clothes approached the group. This was clearly Supervisor Johnson, a man whose weathered hands and no-nonsense expression suggested he had dealt with his share of difficult situations. These the troublemakers? He asked bluntly. These are 3 young men who are about to discover what real work looks like, Hayes replied. They're yours for 6 hours. If they give you any problems whatsoever, they go straight to processing. For charges. Johnson looked the 3 students up and down with obvious skepticism. University boys, eh? Probably never done a day's real work in their lives. Well, that's about to change. He gestured toward a service entrance. Come on then. We've got toilets that need scrubbing, floors that need mopping, and windows that need cleaning. And after that, we'll find you some heavier work. As they began to follow Johnson, Hayes called out once more, remember, this isn't punishment, this is education. You're learning what it means to serve others instead of serving only yourselves. Don't waste this opportunity. Marcus turned back. Sergeant Hayes, after this, how do we make sure we never act like this again? Hayes considered the question seriously. You remember this feeling, the shame, the fear, the realization that your actions have consequences for real people. You remember that every person you meet, whether they're wearing a uniform, working in service, or just trying to do their job, deserves basic human respect. And you remember that freedom isn't free. People like me have fought and died so you could have the privilege of being stupid tourists in London. The 3 friends nodded solemnly, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of the lesson they were about to learn. Johnson led them toward their 6 hours of hard labor, muttering, Cocky university boys think they know everything. We'll see how cocky you are after cleaning the staff quarters and scrubbing down the maintenance areas. And don't even think about slacking off. I've got eyes everywhere. As they disappeared through the service entrance, Hayes returned to his post. The other guards dispersed back to their positions, and the area gradually returned to normal. Tourists continued to pass by, but word had spread quickly about what had happened, and the new visitors treated the guards with noticeably more respect than usual. Hayes resumed his position, standing straight and still, once again appearing to be a motionless figure in a red tunic and bearskin hat. But now he was a figure who had demonstrated that beneath the ceremonial exterior lay a real person, a veteran, a professional, and someone who commanded genuine respect. The 3 students were about to spend the next 6 hours learning exactly what that respect should look like, and why some people should never be pushed too far. The backup guards arrived with military precision, forming a semicircle around Jake, Connor, and Marcus. Each guard was armed and carried himself with the same disciplined bearing that had initially fooled the three students into thinking Hayes was just a harmless decoration. The lead guard, a corporal with sharp eyes and graying temples, approached Hayes for a brief consultation. "What's the situation, Sergeant?" the corporal asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with troublemakers. Hayes gestured toward the three students while maintaining his professional demeanor. "These individuals have been harassing me at my post for approximately 20 minutes. They escalated to attempting physical contact with my weapon and have been verbally abusive when asked to cease their behavior." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but the corporal silenced him with a single look. "You'll have your chance to speak when we're ready to hear from you," he said firmly. The corporal turned back to Hayes. "Any threats made?" "Multiple instances of verbal aggression, interference with duties, and one subject called me a dancing monkey," Hayes reported matter-of-factly. The word sounded even worse when delivered in Hayes's calm, professional tone, and Jake visibly winced at hearing his insult repeated. Connor still clutched his phone, but his hands were trembling so badly he could barely hold it steady. The video, that had seemed like such a brilliant idea, now felt like evidence of their stupidity. Marcus stood completely silent, his eyes darting between the guards' weapons and their stern faces. The corporal nodded and made notes on a small pad. "Right then. You three, identification documents now." The demand for identification made everything feel suddenly official and serious. Jake fumbled for his wallet with shaking hands, while Connor and Marcus reluctantly produced their student ID cards and driver's licenses. The guards examined the documents carefully, noting down names, addresses, and other details. "University of Manchester," the corporal observed, reading from Connor's student ID. "Long way from home, aren't you? I suppose they don't teach respect for military personnel in Manchester these days." "We were just having a laugh," Jake said, weakly, his voice barely audible. "We didn't mean any harm." Another guard, a younger man with sergeant's stripes, stepped forward. "A laugh?" he repeated incredulously. "You thought it was funny to mock a soldier at his post? To interfere with security operations at the royal residence?" His voice carried genuine anger that made all three students flinch. The corporal continued, writing, then looked up at the three friends with an expression of profound disappointment. "Do you have any idea what Sergeant Hayes has done in service to his country? The battles he's fought, the sacrifices he's made? And you thought it would be amusing to treat him like a street performer?" Jake tried to answer but found himself unable to form words. The weight of their actions was finally sinking in, and the reality of facing trained soldiers rather than a silent statue was overwhelming. These men had served in combat zones, had risked their lives for their country, and had earned the right to be treated with dignity and respect. Hayes spoke up from his position. "I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan, been decorated for valor under fire, and have defended this realm for 8 years. Today was the first time I've ever been treated with such blatant disrespect by civilians I've sworn to protect." The words hit Jake like physical blows. He had never considered that the silent guard might be a war veteran, someone who had genuinely risked everything in service to others. The man he had mocked and tormented was a hero who deserved honor, not harassment. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly, speaking for the first time since the backup had arrived. The corporal consulted his notes and exchanged glances with the other guards. "Well, you've interfered with military personnel, created a public disturbance, attempted to handle a weapon without authorization, and been verbally abusive to a decorated veteran. Technically, we could charge you with several offenses." Connor felt his knees go weak. Criminal charges would destroy their futures before they had even properly begun. University expulsion, criminal records, disappointed families. The consequences stretched out before them like a nightmare. However, the corporal continued, "Sergeant Hayes has the discretion to determine how this matter is handled, given that he was the primary target of your behavior." All eyes turned to Hayes, who had resumed his position, but was clearly considering his options. The three students watched him desperately, hoping for mercy they probably didn't deserve. Hayes looked at each of them in turn, studying their faces. with the careful attention of someone trained to judge character under pressure. He saw three young men who had been stupid and disrespectful, but who were now genuinely frightened and perhaps genuinely sorry for what they had done. "You're students," Hayes said finally. "That means you're supposed to be learning something. The question is whether you've learned anything from this experience." Jake nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir. We have. We're sorry. We're really, really sorry." Hayes continued to study them. "Sorry that you got caught, or sorry that you treated another human being with such disrespect?" The distinction was important, and Jake struggled to find the right words. "Both, sir. But mostly I'm ashamed of how we acted. You didn't deserve that. No one deserves that." Hayes nodded slowly. He had dealt with many difficult situations during his military career, and he had learned to distinguish between genuine remorse and empty words designed to avoid consequences. These three young men seemed genuinely shaken by what they had learned about themselves and their behavior. "I'm going to make you an offer," Hayes said quietly. "An alternative to formal charges that will follow you for the rest of your lives." The three friends waited breathlessly for his decision, understanding that their futures hung in the balance of whatever mercy this soldier might choose to show them. They had pushed him too far, but now their fate rested entirely in the hands of the man they had so foolishly decided to torment. Jake's face had gone pale, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. The adrenaline from being the center of attention had been replaced by a different kind of rush, the dangerous thrill of defying authority. "You're bluffing," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried just minutes before. "You can't actually do anything to us. We're tourists. We have rights." Hayes remained perfectly still for a moment, then reached for the radio attached to his belt. The small black device looked insignificant, but everyone present understood its power. With one call, Hayes could summon backup, security forces, and potentially police officers who would take a very dim view of what they had witnessed. "Last warning," Hayes said calmly, his finger hovering over the radio's talk button. "Leave now or explain your behavior to the authorities." Connor, who had been recording everything, suddenly realized the full implications of their situation. Unlike Jake, he understood that having video evidence of their harassment could actually work against them if the police became involved. "Jake, man, maybe we should just go," he said quietly, finally lowering his phone. But Marcus, perhaps trying to impress his friends or simply caught up in the moment, made a critical error in judgment. He stepped forward and pointed an accusing finger at Hayes. "You think you're so tough with that costume and that gun? You're just a tourist attraction, mate. A dancing monkey in a funny hat." The insult hit Hayes harder than any physical blow could have. He had served his country with distinction, had faced real danger in real combat situations, and had earned his position through years of dedication and sacrifice. To be called a dancing monkey by someone who had never served anything greater than his own amusement was more than Hayes could tolerate professionally. "That's enough," Hayes said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his earlier shouting. He pressed the talk button on his radio and spoke with calm authority. "Control, this is Hayes at Post 7. I have 3 individuals creating a disturbance and interfering with guard duties. Request immediate backup for potential detention." The radio crackled back immediately. "Copy that, Hayes. Backup en route, ETA 2 minutes. The effect on the 3 friends was immediate and dramatic. Jake's earlier bravado evaporated completely as he realized they were about to face real consequences for their actions. Connor began frantically trying to delete the video from his phone, his hands shaking as he navigated through the menu. Marcus stepped backward, his face showing the first signs of genuine fear. The crowd of tourists began to disperse quickly. What had been entertaining when it seemed harmless suddenly became uncomfortable when official intervention was involved. Nobody wanted to be a witness to what was clearly about to become a serious incident. Wait, Jake said desperately, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "We were just joking around. Can't you take a joke? We didn't mean anything by it." Hayes studied the 3 young men with the steady gaze of someone trained to assess threats and judge character. "A joke," he repeated slowly. You found it amusing. To mock a soldier at his post? You thought it was funny to interfere with security operations? You considered it entertaining to insult someone who has sworn to serve his country? The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting the thoughtlessness and disrespect the three friends had shown. Jake squirmed under Hayes's intense stare, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had done. In the distance, they could hear the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets of boots moving in formation. Hayes's backup was arriving exactly as promised, and the sound sent a chill through all three students. This was no longer a game or a prank gone wrong. This was about to become an official incident with potential legal consequences. "Please," Connor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're sorry. We didn't know. We didn't think." "You didn't think," Hayes agreed coldly. "You saw a soldier doing his duty and decided he existed for your entertainment. You assumed that discipline meant weakness and respect meant nothing." He paused as the sound of boots grew closer. "Now you're going to learn the difference between a person who chooses to show restraint and someone who is unable to defend themselves." Marcus had gone completely silent, his earlier bravado replaced by obvious panic. He kept looking around as if searching for an escape route, but the approaching backup had effectively surrounded the area. There was nowhere to run, and even if there had been, fleeing would only make their situation worse. Jake made one last desperate attempt to talk his way out of trouble. "Look, we're university students. We're here on holiday. Our parents will be worried if we don't come home tonight. Can't you just let us go with a warning?" Hayes considered this for a moment, his expression unreadable. The backup unit was now visible, 4 additional guards moving toward them with purpose and authority. The 3 students watched their approach with growing dread, finally understanding that their actions had consequences they were not prepared to face. "Your parents should have taught you respect," Hayes replied quietly. "Since they apparently failed in that duty, perhaps the authorities can succeed where they did not." He keyed his radio again. "Control, subjects are cooperative, but detention is still required for formal processing." The reality of their situation finally sank in completely. What had started as a harmless prank had escalated into a confrontation with trained military personnel, and now they were facing the possibility of arrest, criminal charges, and a permanent record that would follow them for the rest of their lives. The 3 friends stood there, no longer cocky pranksters, but frightened young men who had learned too late that some people should never be pushed too far. The afternoon heat was making everyone uncomfortable, but Jake seemed energized by the growing audience. More tourists had gathered in a circle around the scene, with phones out and cameras clicking. Some were genuinely entertained, while others looked increasingly worried about what they were witnessing. An elderly British couple tried to intervene politely, with the gentleman saying, "Perhaps you boys should leave the guard alone now." But Jake just laughed them off. "Mind your own business, Grandpa," Jake replied rudely, his confidence boosted by what he saw as his viral moment in the making. Connor kept his phone trained on the action, already imagining the millions of views their video would get. "This is going to make us famous," he whispered excitedly to Marcus, who was now trying to balance on one foot while making faces at Hayes. Sergeant Hayes had been calculating his options carefully. His orders were clear: remain at post unless there was a genuine threat to security or if someone physically interfered with his duties. So far, the 3 young men had been annoying and disrespectful, but they hadn't crossed the line into actual interference. However, Hayes could sense they were building up to something bigger, something that would force his hand. Jake suddenly had what he thought was a brilliant idea. He noticed that Hayes was holding his rifle in the traditional position and decided that getting the guard to move or react would be the ultimate victory. "Watch this, guys," he announced to his friends in the crowd. "I'm going to make Tin Man here break character." He reached out slowly, as if to touch the rifle. This was the moment Hayes had been waiting for, the moment when annoyance became a legitimate security threat. The instant Jake's fingers came within inches of the weapon, Hayes sprang into action with lightning speed that shocked everyone present. "Stand back," Hayes roared in a voice that could be heard 3 blocks away. The sound was so powerful and unexpected that several tourists jumped backward and a few children began crying. Jake froze with his hand still extended, suddenly realizing that the statue he had been tormenting was very much alive and very much angry. Hayes stepped forward with military precision, his rifle now held in a ready position. His entire demeanor had changed from statue still to intensely alert and threatening. "You will remove yourself from this area immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The transformation was so sudden and complete that the entire crowd fell silent. Jake, Connor, and Marcus stood frozen, finally understanding that they had seriously miscalculated the situation. The guard they had been treating like an object of entertainment was actually a highly trained soldier who looked fully capable of backing up his words with action. I was just," Jake stammered, but Hayes cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You were just interfering with a member of Her Majesty's Guard in the performance of his duties," Hayes stated coldly. "You were just attempting to handle a military weapon without authorization. You were just creating a disturbance on royal property." Each accusation hit Jake like a physical blow as he realized the serious nature of what he had done. Connor, still holding his phone, made the mistake of continuing to record. Hayes noticed immediately and took 2 steps toward him. "Turn off that device and delete any footage you have taken," he ordered. "This is a security matter now." "You can't make me delete anything," Connor replied, trying to sound defiant but failing as his voice cracked. "This is public property," Hayes smiled grimly. "This is royal property, and I am authorized to confiscate any recording devices that may compromise security operations. You have 10 seconds to comply voluntarily, or I will call for backup, and you will be detained while the matter is sorted out officially." The mention of detention and official consequences finally broke through the 3 friends' arrogance. Marcus, who had been silent since Hayes first shouted, tugged on Jake's sleeve. "Maybe we should just go," he whispered urgently, but Jake, despite his fear, couldn't resist one last show of defiance. "This is ridiculous," he said, though his voice was shaking. "We were just having fun. Everyone was laughing. You're supposed to just stand there and take it. That's your job." Hayes's eyes narrowed dangerously. "My job is to protect this palace and everyone in it from threats, disturbances, and security breaches. My job is to maintain order and respect. For the crown, you have interfered with both of those duties." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And my job includes dealing with individuals who mistake military discipline for weakness." The crowd had grown larger but much quieter. Many tourists were now openly staring at Jake, Connor, and Marcus with disapproval and embarrassment. What had started as entertainment had turned into an uncomfortable confrontation that no one wanted to be associated with. Hayes took another step forward, and the 3 friends instinctively backed away. "You have 2 choices," he continued in a voice that brooked no argument. "You can leave this area immediately and consider this a warning about respecting military personnel and royal property. Or you can continue your current behavior and discover exactly what authority I have to deal with security threats." The students were finally beginning to understand that they had pushed someone who was not going to be pushed around. The game had changed completely, and they were no longer in control of the situation. Hayes stood before them, not as a silent statue to be mocked, but as a soldier prepared to use whatever means necessary to maintain order and respect. The summer sun blazed down on the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace as hundreds of tourists gathered to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood 3 university students from Manchester, Jake, Connor, and Marcus, who had driven down to London for what they called their epic weekend adventure. The trio had been friends since childhood, bonded by their shared love of pranks and their complete disregard for authority. Jake, the unofficial leader of their group, spotted the motionless figure of a Queen's Guard standing at his post. The soldier stood perfectly still in his iconic red tunic and towering black bearskin hat, his rifle held at attention. His face showed no expression, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if he were carved from stone. "Look at this guy," Jake whispered to his friends, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Bet you he won't even blink if I mess with him." Connor and Marcus exchanged glances, already knowing where this was heading. They had seen Jake's pranks before, He was the type who would do anything for a laugh, especially if it meant getting attention from the growing crowd of onlookers. The Queen's Guard, whose name was Sergeant William Hayes, had been serving for 8 years. He was a decorated veteran who had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan and earned multiple commendations for his service. Standing guard at the palace was considered an honor, and Hayes took his duty seriously. He had dealt with countless tourists. Over the years, some respectful, others annoying, but none had prepared him for what was about to unfold. Jake approached the guard first, stopping just inches from his face. "Hello there, tin soldier," he said loudly, making sure the nearby tourists could hear. "Can you hear me in there?" He waved his hand dramatically in front of the guard's face, but Hayes remained perfectly still, his training keeping him focused despite the obvious provocation. Encouraged by what he saw as weakness, Jake became bolder. He began making funny faces at the guard, pulling his cheeks and sticking out his tongue while Connor filmed everything on his phone. "This is going straight to social media," Connor announced. "My followers are going to love this." Marcus joined in, pretending to march beside the guard in an exaggerated military style that drew laughter from some tourists and disapproving looks from others. What the 3 friends didn't realize was that Queen's Guards are not just ceremonial figures. They are active duty soldiers, fully trained and authorized to use force when necessary. Their rifles are loaded, and they have the legal right to detain anyone who threatens the royal premises or interferes with their duties. Hayes had been watching the situation carefully, noting how the 3 young men were becoming increasingly aggressive in their behavior. The crowd began to grow as word spread about the entertaining spectacle. Some tourists laughed and took pictures, while others looked uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. A few tried to discreetly move away, sensing that the situation was escalating beyond harmless fun. Hayes could feel the tension building, but his training required him to remain at his post unless the threat became serious enough to warrant action. Jake, feeding off the attention from the crowd, decided to take his prank to the next level. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a squeaky toy, a rubber chicken that made an obnoxious noise when squeezed. He began squeaking it directly next to the guard's ear while making chicken sounds. "Bawk, bawk, bawk. Come on, soldier boy. Give us a smile," he taunted, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. Connor continued filming while providing commentary like a sports announcer. "And Jake goes in for another attack on our statue here. The guard remains frozen, folks. This guy is either really well trained or completely dead inside." The comment drew more laughter from the crowd, which only encouraged the 3 friends to continue their harassment. Marcus, not wanting to be left out of what he saw as their moment of fame, approached from the other side. He began doing an elaborate dance routine around the guard, complete with ridiculous poses and exaggerated facial expressions. The performance was clearly meant to mock the military bearing and dignity that Hayes represented. What none of them noticed was the subtle change in Hayes's posture. His jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, and his grip on his rifle had shifted slightly. Years of military training had taught him to recognize when a situation was moving from annoying to potentially threatening. The 3 young men were becoming more aggressive, more personal in their attacks, and their behavior was affecting the other tourists and the security of the area. The breaking point was approaching, though Jake, Connor, and Marcus remained completely oblivious to the storm they were about to unleash. They saw only a silent figure in a funny hat, not the highly trained soldier who was rapidly running out of patience with their disrespectful behavior. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach them a lesson they would never forget about the difference between harmless fun and serious consequences.